When your dog isn't feeling right, he may let you know with a whimper or lack of appetite. That's not the case when your animal companion is a bird or reptile. On this episode of the Paw Report, we're joined by Dr. Kenneth Welle, who says reading your exotic pet can be a little tricky, so it's important to learn the signs of stress. We'll have more on that coming up. Stay with us.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.
Okaw Vet Clinic in Tuscola and Dr. Sally Foote remind you to properly take care of your pets and are happy to help support the Paw Report on WEIU. Okaw Vet Clinic located at 140 West Sale Street in downtown Tuscola. More information available at okawvetclinic.com.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Paw Report. I am your host, Kelly Runyon, and do we have a treat for you on this episode of the Paw Report? We're joined today by Dr. Kenneth Welle from the University of Illinois Veterinary Teaching Hospital up in Champaign-Urbana, and he also brought along with him two special friends. We're going to introduce them in just a moment, but first, Dr. Welle, thank you so much for joining us. We're talking today about stress and exotic pets. Right. Hence the exotic pets that you brought with you today. Sure. We'll get to the introduction formally of your two friends in a moment, but tell us about yourself.
Well, I graduated from the University of Illinois a long time ago, 1988, and at the time there really was not a lot of training for exotic pets, so I kind of educated myself over the years through continuing education and such. I've obtained board certification in avian medicine. And then 7 years ago, I joined the university faculty in the zoological medicine service. So I kind of went full circle.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your department. You work with a team of people, and when you
so we have 4 faculty, and we have a number of different missions. We treat exotic pets. We have a couple of zoos that we provide services for. We have a wildlife facility, a wildlife medical clinic that takes care of injured wildlife. And then we also, one of our faculty runs a wildlife epidemiology lab where they look into investigate wildlife diseases. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a broad-based service. And then we also share a residency with Brookfield Zoo and Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. So our resident spends the first year with us and then spends the second 2 years with the Chicago facilities.
When we communicated before this interview, you said I was going to bring a macaw, and I got real excited because I remember as a child when I went to Busch Gardens and I was in the picture where my arms were spread out and the macaws were on my shoulders. And you brought a couple of your buddies here today. Introduce who you brought and tell us about them.
Sure. This is Phoenix and this is Boston. Phoenix is a green-winged macaw. Boston is a blue and gold macaw. They were raised by the same breeder. I got them when they were about 4 months old. My goal was actually to train them so that I could fly them free outside, and we do that regularly. So they spend quite a bit of time outdoors. And then again, they are very social animals. So one of the things I wanted to make sure of is that when I'm not there, that they're not just by themselves, and so they have companions. And they are very much like a big brother and a little brother. So this guy can bully this one a little bit sometimes, but then sometimes he'll go up and instigate a little bit. It's very amusing to watch the dynamic between them because they can sometimes be looks like they hate each other, but but then they'll preen each other before they go to sleep at night, and they always sit next to each other when they're going to sleep, and so they're definitely if they're separated, he starts yelling Boston until Boston will come back to him. Mm-hmm. So
why did you decide to get? I before we started recording our episode here, I called him a parrot, and I corrected myself, and you said
well,
it's
they are
okay to
parrots.
call them a parrot.
There's about 350 different species of parrots, and so macaws are one category of parrot. And so there's about maybe 30 species of macaw. Some of them are really large, like these guys, and then the smallest of them is probably a tenth of this size. So it is a big group when you say parrot, and everything from the little budgie that you see at the pet store that's a fairly inexpensive bird is a parrot, but all the way up to these guys, and then there are some that are a little bit more unusual, like the kakapo in New Zealand is a ground parrot, and it's nocturnal. It's very different physiologically and physically from most of the other parrots. So it's a very big group.
Why do you think more people are turning to exotic pets as opposed to having your traditional dogs and cats?
I'm not sure that I've observed that more people are. What I have seen is, that people will sometimes switch. Back in the, no bites. Hey, no bites. I'd say back in the 80s and 90s, the parrots were the huge thing. And then, later 90s, then people got hedgehogs, and then people got sugar gliders. And, so it's shifted around in terms of what species of exotic pet is the most popular. But I think that the total level has remained pretty similar. I do think that people get that mostly because they want something a little different sometimes. I had some interest in it I came to it kind of backwards. I came to enjoying them so much because on some externships when I was going to veterinary school, I worked with some veterinarians that worked with parrots, and I just love their personality. So they're very intelligent and
trainable. You said.
Yeah, they're very trainable. And it adds a whole different aspect when you hear them talking to you, especially hearing them in your own voice. So it's just something that you kind of have to catch the bug. They're definitely not for everybody. They're not quite as easy as your traditional pets most of the time. They have special requirements, and most people, I think, don't necessarily know how to read them and their body language and, just what their needs are as easily as they can with dogs and cats, which they don't always do accurately for them either.
That leads me into my next question. Are they hard to keep? And I guess that would vary by species. If you have a snake, if you have a parrot, if you have a small mammal, then all of those are going to be different.
Exactly.
But talk about maybe in your circumstance, you mentioned it early on in the interview that you let them, I asked you if you kept them in a cage together, and you said quite the contrary. They have their own room.
They have a room that's about 22 feet by 11 feet. All
right, that's what happened.
They spend the nights in there, and usually the mornings, around the middle of the day, they actually get let outside. Now, this is not something that we would ever recommend for people that haven't really well trained their birds, and frankly, I chose macaws because we were talking a little bit earlier about predators, and macaws are large enough that predators are less of a problem for them than they would be for, say, a cockatiel or a parakeet or something like that. That's a much smaller bird. Echo. He's a little bit of a troublemaker.
He's a little rambunctious.
Yeah.
He should feel better now that he relieved himself. So let's hope Boston stays calm too. Why are exotic pet owners reluctant to bring their animals to the vet?
There's a few reasons. I think some of it relates to they don't know that it's valuable. And so, your dogs and cats, they have vaccines and they need heartworm pills and things along those lines. And so there's this understanding that a veterinarian needs to be involved in their care. And I think that a lot of people just don't understand that a veterinarian can provide a lot of service for somebody with an exotic pet. The way I always look at it is if I see them for their annual checkup or something, I'm seeing them for an hour a year. The person is keeping them for the rest of the 365 days of the year. And so the information that I can provide them about how they can feed their bird better, or how they can train them a little bit better, or provide them with enrichment so that their pet is more has a better life, healthier, but also behaviorally and quality of life wise. So we try to provide those things for our clients so that they can provide the best lives for their pets.
Now, how does a pet owner, I suppose if they're long-term exotic pet owners, they're a little bit more knowledgeable, but somebody new to a species like this, how would they know if something's abnormal? When you have a dog or a cat, your dog may whimper, may not eat, very obvious signs.
There can be, some of those things can be fairly similar. Most of our prey animals have this instinct that if they look like they're sick, they are going to attract predators. And so they do at least make an attempt to try to put up a good front. On the other hand, there are some subtle things that you can encounter. We can see a reduction in behaviors sometimes with some of these birds. They'll actually do fewer of their normal behaviors, so they'll just sit a little bit more, something along those lines. Phoenix, he preens his feathers a little aggressively sometimes. So we moved.
I can see it on
not
his belly.
long ago. So he just takes some of those feathers, and as he preens them, he's a little rough on them, and so that's an indication sometimes of stress. So there are a number of different things that they can do that will give you indications that there might be a problem.
What other exotics have you encountered, and what were some of their ailments? Maybe that an owner brought into you saying that they did this or did that, and you instantly said, there's a problem.
Yeah, we see all kinds of things. So a lot of birds. We see a lot of rabbits, guinea pigs, ferrets.
Ferrets are actually pretty popular, aren't
hamsters, gerbils, chinchillas, and then we see some reptiles. I'd say probably right now the most popular of the reptiles is maybe a bearded dragon lizard. And they all have a little bit different ways of kind of showing that there might be an indication of a problem, and they all have different common problems. Sometimes the problem is an observable thing, like they're limping or something along those lines. Other times it's more vague. We have a kind of a facetious acronym that we say ADR, they ain't doing right. We get a lot of those where it's just a very vague type of problem, and then we have to kind of work through the puzzle and try to figure out exactly what's going on with them. In some cases, we simply can do some palliative measures to reduce pain or reduce stress or other things like that. It's not picking on him. Reduce pain or stress sometimes without even knowing what's going on. There are times where either the cost of diagnostic tests or something like that might preclude our spending, our being able to get all the information we need to get a definitive diagnosis. And in those cases, sometimes we just have to simply treat what we know is there. So, okay, we can tell that this is this animal has some pain, and so we can use pain relievers, or we can surmise that there might be an infection, so we might be able to use an antibiotic or something along those lines. So ideally, we try to get a definitive answer as to what's going on. In some cases, we simply have to go with what we do know, certainly this animal needs some fluids because he's not drinking enough, or they're not eating, so we might need to provide a little bit of nutritional support for them. So again, there are lots of things that we can do that aren't necessarily entirely dependent on a nailed down diagnosis.
What can a pet owner do to make sure that their pet stays well and healthy? Environment
I think there's a tier of those things. Environment's very critical. Nutrition is very critical. And then trying to minimize stresses for them. And that's so different with different species. So I would say the first thing that a pet owner should do is learn as much as they can about their animal, because the natural history of that animal is going to be different. Something that would be required for one species might provide a tremendous amount of stress for a different species, because it's just not what they're, what they're accustomed to, not what they're adapted to. And so you may be stressing that animal because you're giving them the wrong kind of husbandry in general. So
Right.
wrong kind of diet, wrong kind of environment. A lot of our smaller animals like to hide. Near a hamster, there's a lot of things that want to eat you. And so they burrow. And so being underground provides them a sense of security. So having deep bedding that they can burrow in is very important for their sense of well-being. You're never going to have a macaw burrow. And so in fact, giving them even a box that they can climb inside of can actually create nesting instincts in them, and that can create aggressive behavior, and that can create some stresses, or a female might decide she wants to start laying eggs in those cases, and that's a physiologic stress on her. So again, the very same thing that in one species would provide them with an alleviation of fear and stress will create a different problem in another species.
How would a person choose the right vet if they suspect something is wrong with their bird or small mammal or
I think the
reptile?
big thing is they need to ask around. So, a lot of veterinarians are not comfortable seeing various exotic pets, and so you need to ask them. And most are pretty honest about it. They're going to say, you know what, I'll trim wings or something like that, but I'm not very comfortable with medical problems. And then you ask them, well, where do you send patients when you need to? And that would be your first referral. So calling the local veterinarian is a good way to find somebody that they would recommend. And you can call a few, and then if you get the same name from several people, then that's probably a good bet.
Do you recommend preventative maintenance, just like you would take your dog every year to get heartworm checks?
Certainly.
And is
Again,
it the same for all?
We don't have the same kind of set protocols because again, we don't get heartworm in our birds, and there really are no commercial vaccines that we typically use. At the same time, they are very good at hiding when there's an illness, and so we do like them to come in. We can evaluate their health. Sometimes we'll do some blood tests to kind of get a little bit more information than we can get from just a physical exam. And then probably the most important aspect of it is we can update people on things that we have learned about. I guess what we found out that if we provide their food in little foraging toys where they have to work for their food, that's going to prevent a lot of their problems because it occupies a lot of their time. So we can update people on things like that when they come in for their annual checkups.
Before they even get to the vet's office, though, they're probably stressed on how they're going to get the animal there.
Sure.
How can you minimize the stress not only for the pet owner but for the actual pet?
I think the big thing is that you need to start training them. Every species of animals is trainable. We can train goldfish. So you need to find something that is appropriate for reinforcing them, and so a lot of times it's going to be food, but you can train all of these animals to go in and out of a carrier, for instance. So that would be maybe a good step. You can so again figure out a few behaviors that would make life easier for them and for you, and then you train those particular behaviors. The training itself is enriching for most of these animals because it's an activity. It stimulates their brain a little bit, and it's a good way for the owner to interact with them in a way that's fairly positive. In fact, it's probably one of the best ways to communicate with your pet is to do some training with them.
Car rides and that sort of thing. What about towel wrapping? I read that too.
Yeah, that can be very helpful because typically typically we do have to wrap them in a towel to get a lot of things done. And so if people, a lot of times the birds will take baths, and so if you can kind of dab them with a towel and get them used to that, and maybe even lay the towel over them, then when they come into the veterinarian, that's not the only time they ever have a towel wrapped on them. They're still going to get a little bit stressed from being restrained, and if they get blood collected or other things like that. But it doesn't begin the very moment they see the carrier, if you've trained them for that, and it doesn't begin the moment they see that towel if they've been trained to allow that towel.
How do you begin the training with a carrier? Is it with treats? Is it with food?
Yeah, typically it's with treats, or a lot of times one of the first things that you want to train is what we call targeting. So you can use either a hand or you can use a chopstick or something like that, and essentially you get that animal to touch it, and as soon as they touch it, then you can either give them the treat immediately, or you can use what we call a bridge. A bridge is either a word or a clicker or something like that marks, okay, that's why you're getting a treat, is that behavior you just did now. Mm-hmm. And that's the advantage of that, is if it's a behavior that maybe isn't in close contact with you. So if you're teaching them something from across the room, well, by the time you get across the room to give them their treat, they don't understand what it was that they got the treat for. Mm-hmm. So the clicker or the verbal bridge marks the behavior so that they understand why they're getting a treat.
Do levels of stress vary with different species? Sure. Maybe you said that these two are a bit stressed, just mm-hmm. being here in the studio under the mm-hmm. lights. How can you sense their stress, and then maybe some of the other animals that you've dealt with, their signs?
Definitely the levels of stress vary. So ferrets are a good example. They're asleep in a little towel or something like that, or a t-shirt or something when they come in, and they don't know anything's, they don't even know they're not home sometimes, I think, mm-hmm. because they're just comfortable in that kind of enclosed type of area. They're just a little bit more relaxed with it. These guys tend to be very vigilant. You can see he's got his eyes on everything. He's been pretty still because he's just looking around at everything that's going on around him. Phoenix is, you can tell he's a little bit stressed because he's kind of bitey with me right now. So when I put my hand up, he's grabbing it a little bit hard. And so that is the unusual thing for him. But at least he's started to preen himself. So, that's usually an indication that they're a little bit more comfortable. So he's starting to come around, and he's starting to want to
investigate a little bit more.
Things. Yeah, so he's going to climb over to my leg, or he's going to climb over the
he
chair.
Found your microphone, and
so,
he.
Oh yeah. Essentially when I get home, I change my shirt immediately, because I've got pens in my pocket, and I've got a tie on, and I've got glasses in my pocket, and all of that stuff. Stop eating my hand. Let go.
As we have a couple minutes left in our interview, and maybe some advice that you could give to somebody that has an exotic pet, thinking about getting an exotic pet, some advice that you can give to them.
Again, do your homework. I think that's the big thing. You really need to research what these animals are like, not just from the person selling it to you.
Don't be an impulse buyer.
Don't buy it as a gift. People need to go into these things with their eyes wide open and have a full understanding of what they're getting into before they get started. How long of a commitment is it? A hamster is a 2-year commitment. A macaw is a lifetime commitment. Do you really want a toddler with a wire cutter on their face for the next 30 to 50 years? Mm-hmm. That's something that you really have to consider.
Sure.
So again, I'd say don't eat his wing. Do your homework is the most important thing.
And if people are out there watching and they do have an exotic and they do have questions, my guess is that they could call your office.
Certainly.
And if mm-hmm. they just need some advice or some guidance or assistance, mm-hmm. they can call the University of Illinois.
They can call, and really we have, two very good technicians that can answer some of their questions if we're tied up, and we have an intern and a resident that can answer their questions, and then we have our own faculty. So yes, we have a lot of resources for people that want to call in.
Dr. Kenneth Welle, Phoenix and Boston, they're staring each other down. We so appreciate you coming on the Paw Report. I know you've had clients all week long, and this is kind of your down day, so we appreciate you traveling with the two macaws and visiting us here at the Paw Report for a brief moment. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we appreciate
Thanks
you
for having
spending.
me.
You're welcome. And we appreciate you spending your time here at the Paw Report. I'm your host, Kelly Runyon, and we'll see you next time. If you're a veterinarian, trainer, groomer, specialist, rescue organization, or shelter that would like to partner with the Paw Report by providing expert guests for the show, please contact us by emailing weiu@weiu.net or call 217-581-5956. If you have a topic you'd like to see on the show or questions for our experts, contact us with those too.
Okaw Vet Clinic in Tuscola and Dr. Sally Foote remind you to properly take care of your pets and are happy to help support the Paw Report on WEIU. Okaw Vet Clinic located at 140 West Sale Street in downtown Tuscola. More information available at okawvetclinic.com.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.